All right, so let's get this started. So, quick question. What is the fastest way to fail a class that you're fully capable of passing? So, the fastest way has nothing to do with intelligence, but it's about workflow. So, today is not about dumping a bunch of content on you. Today is about making sure that you leave with a clear system so that you know exactly what to do each week, how to make the points work, and how to avoid the 2 or 3 predictable mistakes that derail people every semester, even incredibly smart students. So, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be doing a quick cognitive warm up to kind of set the tone and show you what the field of cognitive psychology is like. But the main goal is really, really simple. We're going to help you start this course confident. We're going to help you start this course oriented. And we are going to help you start this course ahead of the curve. So before we jump in, we're going to start off by removing a really small barrier right away. And that barrier is my name, because I don't want anything, even something minor, to make you hesitate to ask a question or to join in a discussion or to interrupt me during a lecture. So that first barrier could very well be how to say my name. So my name is Dr. Igor Yurichevich, and here is a quick pronunciation guide. So how do you say that? Well, the last name, it starts with a U, and then there's a reach, and then you open up and you say ah, and then there's a beach. And if there's any mathematics majors here, you can just take my word for it if you're not. That little gray triangle there is what is known as a beach. So those are the 4 components, and it goes U, reach, beach. So let's try that all together on 3. 1, 2, 3. It's almost there. It's almost there. Try it one more time. 1, 2, 3. All right, awesome. So the reason I wanted to set this up early is because it's going to matter a lot, especially later on down the road. So I run this class like a lab meeting. And what that means is that we're going to have real discussions and not just me sitting up here talking to you. And that, I'll be completely transparent with you, has always been a challenge for me as a professor. So hopefully we can conquer that mountain together this semester. But when I say discussion, I want to be very clear right from the beginning. It does not mean that you have to be brilliant or fast or even confident in what we're discussing. What it means is that I want this class to be a place where we can practice thinking out loud. And in cognitive psychology, as you're going to see, wrong ideas are normal. So in the history of psychology, cognitive psychology is one of the approaches that showed us that our folk understanding, our intuition of how our mind works is just completely wrong. And it is completely fine to have wrong ideas. Wrong ideas are normal. Wrong ideas are not the problem. But the problem is leaving class with that wrong idea still sitting there in your mind as the right idea. So here's the rule I want to use for the semester. Even if you have a half-formed thought, I would say it. I can work with half-formed. What I can't work with is silence. So if you're unsure, you can literally just say, hey, you know what? I'm not sure, but my guess is. Or you can say something like, you know what? I just want to kind of throw this out as a possibility, or can I test this idea out loud? And that's what I'm really aiming for this semester. That's the culture I kind of want to create here. So incredibly low pressure, incredibly high thinking. And as we go forward, again, I struggle with this myself sometimes. So if you struggle with participating in class, welcome to my world, but hopefully we'll refine it together as we go on. All right, so now you know the name. The next portion of this, I just want to give you a little bit of background on my research projects, just as a sort of insight into the kind of work that I do. I actually do work in the field of cognitive psychology. This is my area of expertise. And specifically, what I've been working on in the last few years is visual language. So visual language is all about how do we understand pictures, images, how do we use images to communicate different ideas, different concepts, And the work that I do specifically focuses on the type of visual language that is used in comic books. So I'll give you one example, one recent example from my research lab, and that is the visual metaphor that is used in comic book images that is known as close-up eye asymmetry. So a visual metaphor is something that, much like a linguistic metaphor, it stands for an idea that is not literal. It stands for an idea that is a concept. It stands in for an idea that you're trying to communicate without explicitly portraying that particular aspect. So I identified this metaphor that exists in visual language, and it's known as close-up eye asymmetry. So here we have three examples from comic book covers, and we'll start off with the one on the left. That's Storm from the X-Men. And this is a metaphorical depiction of, or this is a depiction of close-up eye asymmetry, because first, the image is close up. So Storm is drawn very close to the viewer. She's not far away. She's not off in the distance somewhere. She is within about, I would say, about 3 to 5 feet from where you would be if this was an actual real person that you were standing in front of them. So first off, she is close. She's in your personal space. Secondly, we have asymmetry specifically around the eyes. So the eyes are a very, very important component of anybody's face. You can communicate a lot with what your eyes are doing. So eyes are incredibly important. And here we have asymmetry around her eyes, specifically the lightning coming out of her right eye, and also the hair that is just flowing down over her left eye. And what that does is it communicates the idea that Storm, this superpowered mutant being, she is both like us because she's close in proximity to us, but she is unlike us because her eyes are asymmetrical. And again, if you take a look at 99.9% of humans, our eyes are very symmetrical. So she is at one time like us. She's a human being. She has thoughts. She has feelings much like us. At the same time, she's not like us. She's a mutant. She has superpowers. And what I found when I discovered this metaphor is that it is used over and over and over again, specifically to communicate without saying it explicitly that the person that is being depicted is like you, but at the same time, not like you. So in the second example there in the center, we have Magneto. The artist made a very specific choice not to draw lightning coming out of his two eyes. Could have easily been done, but they wanted to use that metaphorical device of saying, hey, Magneto is close up, he's like you, but at the same time, his eyes are asymmetrical in some way, so he's unlike you. Same thing with the Harbinger Omegas comic book. Both eyes could have been portrayed as being lighted up. Only one eye is, again, close up, asymmetry, like you, but not like you. And this has been done and achieved in a various number of different ways. So here we have the depiction of powers in using close-up eye asymmetry. Here we have close-up eye asymmetry done with composition. So for the Rocketeer, we have the lighting has created close-up eye asymmetry, where one half of the mask is shaded, but the other half is in light. For the Killing Joke, Batman the Killing Joke cover there in the center, the Joker is holding his camera in a way that creates that close-up eye asymmetry. He could have held the camera the other way. He could have held it landscape mode, but instead the artist decided to put it in portrait mode. I got that right. Put it in portrait mode so as to create asymmetry around the eye and yet still draw him as close up. And you can even do it with things like a skull. So Mystery Society there, that skull could have been anywhere on this cover. Artist chose to put it directly in front of that character's eye to create that close-up eye asymmetry metaphor. So you can do it with compositional elements of actual objects in the image, or you can also do composition where you use non-diegetic objects. So just the way that the different images are combined. So here on the left, we have the preacher. So gigantic head in the back is close up, but that soldier is in front of him in a very specific way, covering that one side of the eye. In the center there, we have the comic for Muse using a lightning bolt. That one is actually pretty important. We'll come back to why in just a moment. And then finally, we have Witchblade and Tomb Raider. Could have been drawn side by side, could have been drawn as two characters on the same plane interacting. Artists decided to let you know that Lara Croft, she is like you, she's not like you, there's something different about her, and they chose to put Witchblade in that particular position, cover up that one eye, create that close-up eye asymmetry. So when I started identifying close-up eye asymmetry, I thought to myself, like you might think of with many metaphors, where did this come from, right? How did this begin? Who decided this? Who created this? How did this gain traction? It's kind of like the first time that you hear a metaphor, a verbal metaphor, like life is a journey. And you think to yourself, wow, that's great. Did you say that? And the person's like, no. And then you'll ask, well, who said it? And the person says, I have no idea. And it's really hard to trace where did those metaphors originate. However, my research was able to uncover where this particular image, metaphorical image, originated. And the clue was in the cover for Muse there. And I will provide the evidence for this as to why this metaphorical image, close-up eye asymmetry, was maybe not created by, but definitely popularized by and introduced into our culture by David Bowie. So this is the cover for David Bowie's 1973 album, Aladdin Sane. And you can see that this has close-up eye asymmetry. Bowie is close to you. Asymmetry around the eye using makeup, using that trademark lightning bolt makeup image. And I argued in my research that this was the event that caused close-up asymmetry to be used in comic books, in other forms of media, as a metaphor for somebody who is like you, so he's a human like you, but also not like you. And honestly, if there ever was somebody who could have been an alien visiting from another planet in our world, it was probably David Bowie. So something is the same about him, he's like you, but something is a little bit different, he's unlike you. Close-up asymmetry communicates that very well. So what I did was I started with the assumption that, well, maybe this was where it all started. So how can I provide evidence that this actually was the image, the ground zero image that introduced close-up eye asymmetry to our visual language, to our culture? Well, one way to do that, or the strategy that I used, was to use converging lines of evidence. And the first line of evidence that I needed to show was that comic book artists, if they adopted close-up eye asymmetry, then they needed to be aware of this particular image. So are comic book artists aware of rock and roll album images? You might think that is painfully obvious, but one thing that you'll learn in research, if you can't prove it, obvious is just not good enough. It can't be something that you think everybody should know. You need to be able to prove it. So for this, I just found covers that directly homaged different rock and roll album covers. So we have the Astonishing Spider-Man referencing Paul McCartney and Wings' Band on the Run. We have the Elementals referencing the Beatles' Abbey Road. And then we have Madman here referencing directly the cover of Aladdin Sane. So that is proof that comic book artists were aware of the art that was on different musical albums. And then the real crucial part of this theory, the real crucial piece of evidence, was when did close-up eye asymmetry start to be used extensively? And that takes into account a few things in terms of how art develops. So the only two things that we really need to know for this argument is, number one, when you are in your teenage years, typically around 9 to 15, oftentimes artists during that time have what they call a crystallizing event. And that crystallizing event is something that they experience that kind of sticks with them throughout their entire artistic life. It's just something that is like really influential. It's kind of like if you ever hear a musician talking about that album that they got when they were a teenager, and that's why they write music the way that they write music. it's kind of that same idea for any form of art, including visual art. Oftentimes between 9 to 15, you'll have that one event, that one exposure, that one piece of art that has a profound effect on you and influences your art going into the future. The other piece of evidence, and this again comes from the psychology of art, is when do artists tend to do their best work? When do they tend to be their most prolific, their most creative? And research has shown that this tends to occur in your late 20s, early 30s. So if you take a look at artists from any form of art, fine art, pop art, music, movies, they tend to do their best work, the work that they're remembered for. For fine artists, this is the work that gets into the textbooks and gets into the museums. They tend to do that in their late 20s to early 30s. So what we're looking for is whether or not artists who were 9 to 15 in 1973 when Aladdin Sane came out, did they all of a sudden start to use close-up eye asymmetry in their late 20s, early 30s when they were doing comic book art? And what I found was that over and over and over again, if you took a look at the big comic book artists from the 90s, such as Rob Liefeld, the guy that invented Deadpool, Adam Hughes, Jim Lee, seminal people in the 1990s comic book art world, they were approximately the right age when Aladdin Sane was released. So you can see Rob Liefeld there at the bottom was about 6 years old. Adam Hughes was 7 years old. Artist Jim Lee was about 9 years old. You can keep going with other ones. 12 and a half years old for Todd McFarlane. 14 years old for Mark Silvestri. 16 years old for Frank Miller. And when they were in the 90s, they were in that sweet spot of massive productivity. So all these artists really made their names in the 90s, created their legacy in the 90s. And you can see that at the bottom there, Todd McFarlane, late 20s, early 30s in the 90s. Mark Silvestri, early 30s in the 90s. Frank Miller, early 30s in the 90s. So that was the clue that maybe it was that image of Aladdin Sane that that cemented or that crystallized that idea of you can depict like you but not like you with this particular image. So the last piece of evidence came not from just a couple of artists. So you can't just find 6 artists that like this particular image and say, hey, there's my final proof. It's not that convincing an argument. It shows that it's possible, but it's not that convincing an argument. So the last thing that I did was I said, all right, if this is a new metaphor, that is a new way to depict superheroes, then what we should find is that when these artists hit their 30s, specifically in that time of the 1990s, when these artists were in their prime, the depiction or the use of close-up eye asymmetry should skyrocket. And importantly, it should only skyrocket for characters that don't have kind of cemented ways of depicting them. So those would be characters that would have been introduced at a particular time known as the Bronze Age in comics and not before then, such as the Golden Age. So characters like Superman, characters like Batman, characters like Wonder Woman, they were introduced in the Golden Age. And they had 30, 40 years of artists saying, this is how you draw these characters. So they kind of have a built-in template, a built-in schema. But new characters like Wolverine, like the Punisher, they would be free for these artists to decide this is how we're going to draw those particular artists. So I did that analysis by literally looking at cover after cover after cover, cover after cover after cover of Golden Age characters and Bronze Age characters. Characters that were already cemented in their depiction before David Bowie's album and characters that debuted after David Bowie's album. And if David Bowie's album was the impetus, was the crystallizing event where this metaphor came into being, then what we should find is that when these artists hit their peak years in the 90s, The golden age use of close-up eye asymmetry should kind of stay stable. The Bronze Age use of close-up eye asymmetry should skyrocket. Spoiler alert, not really. That's exactly what happened. So if you can take a look on the x-axis there's the publication dates of the different comic book covers that I looked at. That arrow down shows you when Aladdin Sane was released. And if you take a look at the golden line, you can see that in the 90s, increase in the use of close-up eye asymmetry, but not really a large increase, not a very dramatic increase, kind of just accumulating along. However, if you take a look at the Bronze Age characters that debuted in the Bronze Age, there was an absolute explosion in the use of close-up eye asymmetry. So all of those different streams of evidence, the crystallizing event, when are you most prolific as an artist? When did Aladdin Sane come out? When did the use of close-up eye asymmetry explode? All of those come together to pinpoint that something happened in 1973 that caused this metaphor to enter our visual language. And what happened in 1973 was that particular image on that David Bowie album was released. So if you have ever heard a metaphor or seen a visual metaphor and thought to yourself, where did it come from? This is, as far as I know, the first time that anybody's tracked it down to the single image that it started with. But it can be done, and it is one of my favorite publications. So it was published, Aladdin Sane and Close-Up Eye Asymmetry, David Bowie's contribution to comic book visual language, in the peer-reviewed comics grid. So this is available online. Anybody can, it's not behind a paywall or anything. So I would have to say that this is probably my favorite piece of research that I've ever published, not just because it happened to be about David Bowie and Aladdin Sane and comic books, like a perfect intersection of two things that I massively love, but also because it was the issue that ticked off one of the things on my bucket list of publishing, and that was to actually publish the F word in a peer-reviewed publication. So in this David Bowie quote that I put in the publication, he says, "I always had a repulsive sort of need to be something more than human. I felt very, very puny as a human. I thought, F that, I want to be Superman." And you should know the boldness and daring that it took to actually submit that, considering that I just said F that. So anyways, check that one off. This is one of my favorite publications. All right, one more thing on close-up eye asymmetry, just again to see the kind of work that I do in cognitive psychology. So a follow-up study to this was close-up eye asymmetry. Visual metaphor communicates the abject, evidence from Batman and Superman comics. So this was part of a special issue on Gothic stories and the Gothic in our culture. So abject, as it refers to the Gothic genre, means something that needs to be excluded. And it's very close to being accepted, but it just needs to be pushed out. It needs to be excluded. So many things in the Gothic genre are beings that are very close to humans, but just not quite humans. They are known as the abject. So things like vampires, right? Vampires are human-like, but they're not human, and they're very dangerous to have around, and we need to push them out of our society. Things like zombies, right? They used to be human. Now they're not human, and they need to be pushed out of our society. They're abject. So that's the idea of the abject in Gothic storytelling. And I thought to myself, well, the abject basically describes the same sort of situation, or could be represented by the visual metaphor of close-up eye asymmetry. Because close-up eye asymmetry metaphorically lets you know that something is like you, right? It's human like you, but it's not like you. It's different from you. So it's a vampire. It looks human, but it's not human. It's a zombie. It looks human, but it's not human. So it does communicate the abject. So I was wondering if I could find evidence that it actually does communicate the abject by seeing if it is used to represent characters that are Gothic, more so than characters that are not Gothic. So I thought to myself, you can't really get more Gothic and non-Gothic than Superman versus Batman. So we got Superman there on the left, and he's all bright colors, and he lives in Metropolis. He's part of society. He is, a mild-mannered reporter for a large metropolitan newspaper by day, and he fights for truth, justice, and the American way. And he is Superman. He's like us. He is, he's man, but super. So he's like us, but he's just the best version of us. Batman, on the other hand, lives in the shadows, lives in the dark. Occasionally, the shadows betray him because they belong to somebody else. But he is Gothic. He looks like a vampire. He is a Batman, right? He's like half bat, half man. He's like us, man. He's not like us, bat. Superman, on the other hand, he's like us, man. He's not like us, well, super. He's a good version of us. He's the best version of us. So if it is true that Batman is Gothic, which I think we can, not to go into too much detail, but I also provided evidence for that, even though I would say it's pretty self-evident. Batman is Gothic, Superman is not Gothic. If that is true, then covers of Batman should use close-up eye asymmetry more often than covers depicting Superman. So I went back, went through cover after cover after cover after cover, and here we have the frequency with which close-up eye asymmetry is used. So on the x-axis there, we have the publication dates. So you can see we go from January 1960 all the way up to December 1999. And on the y-axis there, we have how often, the cumulative frequency, how often was close-up eye asymmetry used to depict these two characters. And as you can see, Batman, very high level of close-up eye asymmetry, goes all the way up to 30 instances across those dates. Whereas Superman, down here, far less. It is used for Superman, but it is used far less, only about 15 instances across the same timeline. So this was very strong evidence that close-up eye asymmetry actually is communicating like you, but not like you, that idea of the abject in Gothic storytelling. And then one final thing, just to kind of give you an insight into, I would say maybe it's a bug in the way that I do my work, but I would like to say that this is a particular bug that's also a feature. When I was making these graphs here, I actually took extra time to make sure, because I knew I had the opportunity, to make sure that in the graph itself, both of Superman's eyes were not covered, and only one eye of Batman was covered. So there is literally close-up eye asymmetry in the graphs. And I'll say two things about that. Number one of the reviewers noted that, and it made my day when they pointed that out. Number two, sometimes when I'm working on this, and it does take extra time, sometimes when I'm working on this to myself, I'll think to myself, I say, you know what? I don't get paid enough to be creative. This is taking extra time. IUSB does not pay me enough to be this creative. And then I stop myself and I think to myself, you know what? IUSB does not pay me enough to not be creative. So you're going to see some hopefully cool things, and just know that it might be a bug, it might be a feature. Hopefully it enhances your experience here. All right. One last note on research, and then I promise we'll move on. So everything you just saw, the visual language, the metaphor, the comic books, the art history, that's the kind of work that I do in my research lab. And one of the reasons that I really like doing this kind of research is that we don't test participants directly. So you will notice at no point during my description of this research did I ever say, oh, we recruited 50 subjects to do this, or we recruited 20 subjects to do this. I don't work with participants. I work with artifacts. I work with images. I work with comics. I work with cultural products. And what that means is that there is no IRB required for the research that I do. So what that really means in practice is this. If you have an idea, we can actually work on it. And we can work on it not next semester, not after paperwork. We can basically work on it immediately. So this is my call that if you are interested in joining my lab, just to let you know, there is an entrance puzzle. And I want to be very clear about what it is and what it is not. So this entrance puzzle, this is not a test of how smart you are. This is not a test about whether you already know psychology. And this is definitely not a way to weed out to weed out people. What it is it is a test of whether or not you enjoy thinking about problems that do not come with instructions. So the puzzle does not reward speed. It does not reward prior knowledge. It rewards curiosity. It rewards persistence. It rewards being able and willing to sit with something that feels slightly uncomfortable for a while. And honestly, even if you don't solve it, just trying it will tell you something useful about whether research like this is a good fit for you. So even if a small part of you thought during this presentation right now, even if a small part of you thought, hey, that was kind of interesting, or if you thought to yourself, you know what, I always wondered if this pet theory of mine is actually true, then I strongly recommend that you give it a shot. The worst case scenario, you're going to spend 20 minutes thinking about a weird problem. Best case scenario, you end up in a research lab doing work like the stuff that you just saw. So the puzzle is on my faculty page. If you try it, it will tell you exactly what to do next. So the next steps are in the puzzle, and that is all I'm going to say, because the moment I explain it, it stops being the thing that it's supposed to be. So if you're the kind of person who hates not knowing how something works, then this is probably for you. All right, enough research. Time to talk about other things. So this is where, as a sort of final intro to who I am, I'm going to talk about the National Alliance on Mental Illness Stigma-Free Initiative. This was an initiative that started, I would say, probably like a decade ago by now. But I am part of this initiative. So this is an initiative that is asking people to be open about their struggles with mental health, to remove the stigma by basically bringing it out of the shadows and into the light, taking people with mental health issues from being abject to being members of society. So this is where I like to tell people about my own struggles with mental health. So just to kind of give you a background on my timeline and my mental health struggles, I started at IUSB in the fall of 2010, and I was diagnosed with depression in the spring of 2012. Now, I would love to tell you that I developed depression in the spring of 2012. And I immediately went to my doctor, and they immediately sent me to a therapist. And that therapist basically said, hey, you have depression, let's work on it. Truth be told, I was undiagnosed for years, struggling for years, making the best of it that I could for years, oftentimes thinking that my struggles were because I was lazy or just wasn't good enough at this, anything but depression. So I finally got diagnosed. I went into therapy. Therapy included prescription medication, and my final prescription was filled in the spring of 2013. And I would love to tell you that that was the end of my depression. I was it. I was cured. No more depression for me. That's not true. Then began the long road of recovery. And I'm still in recovery. I'm still working with it. I have learned to make certain changes and modify certain things, and I'll tell you more about that in just a moment. But just to kind of give you an insight into the change that is possible. One of the things that we use here at IUSB, and this is used at all universities, as a measure of how a professor is doing, is what is their publication record. So one of the ways that you can show that you're being successful, that you're productive, is by how many articles are you publishing every single year. So when I was struggling, 2010, no publications. 2011, no publications. I was able to eke out a publication in 2012. I just got the one in about 3 years, right? It took me to get that one. It was a struggle. After I started my recovery, just to kind of show you how much better things can get. In the spring of 2016, I had 2 publications. In the fall of 2016, I had another publication. In 2017, I had 5 more publications. And this is the difference that is possible when you take your mental health seriously, when you address your mental health, when you stop accusing yourself of being lazy, of just not trying hard enough, of just not being able to do things. And you start to realize that, no, this is something that I need help to deal with. And that's what the other side of the fence looks like. That's what it looks like on the other side of that wall. And I would love to tell you that it's just been up, up, and up all those years afterwards. It's just gotten better. Truth is that I've had good years and I've had really, really bad years. I've had good times and I've had bad times. There were 2 years recently that were literally the 2 worst years of my life. And I made it through those, and it was a struggle. And sometimes you take 2 steps forward, sometimes you take 1 step back. And that is just part of the experience when you're dealing with mental health struggles. So, one of the reasons I like to do this is because I think it's important to talk about. I think it's important to get this out there and start talking about mental health issues like you would a physical injury. So if you were wearing a cast on your arm and somebody said, "Hey, did you break your arm?" You wouldn't like hide it behind your back and say, "Oh, no, I didn't break my arm. What are you talking about?" But when people ask you about your mental health, oftentimes you try to hide it. So one reason I do this is to remove the stigma. The other reason I do this is because I know that going through university is one of the most stressful periods in your life. And I know that a lot of students struggle. And I also know that a lot of students don't reach out because they either feel embarrassed or they feel that their professor will not understand. I was in that boat. I was undiagnosed, not because I didn't have access to doctors, not because I didn't have access to therapists, but because I was embarrassed and I thought nobody would understand. So this is my part in today's meeting where I let you know that I get it. I understand how this works. I've been through it. I'm still going through it. So I would just say if you are at all feeling like you might be struggling with some mental health issues, if you feel like the stress is too much, feel free to reach out. And I don't even need details. All right. My policy on this is say less. But you can just reach out and say, "Professor, I'm really struggling. I'm not going to be in class today." And I will say, "Thank you so much for reaching out. I completely understand." And I will point you to some resources, maybe give you some help to make sure that you can stay on track. "Professor, I don't want to say why, but I'm not going to be able to complete the CogLabs, for this week." Awesome, fine. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know. I will remove those from your final grade. They're not going to affect you. Take the time that you need, to prioritize what's important. So please do not hesitate to reach out. I understand it. I get it. No explanations necessary. I'm not going to ask for any proof or anything like that. I will give you the benefit of the doubt. And please know that I know that you're not lazy. I know that you're not making excuses, because that's what I thought about myself. I thought, hey, I'm struggling because I'm lazy and I'm struggling because I'm making excuses. It's not true. So if you need to reach out for me, please do it early, do it often, do it, and we can navigate this course together, because this course should be a wonderful experience of exploring curiosity and not a horrible burden that is ruining your life. So if it feels like it's a horrible burden, contact me. We'll find a way to lift it, to deal with what you're dealing right now. And just, again, think about this, remember this slide, and just know that I get it. I understand. I'm on your side, and I believe you. All right. That was a lot. Let's do some cognitive stuff. Okay, so before we do this cognitive warm-up, I want to just point out that I want you to treat this like a tiny research lab moment. So I'm not using this cognitive warm-up to judge you. We're going to have certain of these demonstrations in class as we go through the semester. And I'm using this to learn how human minds represent problems, how your mind represents problems, how my mind represents problems. So here's what I want from you. All you need to do is just actually try. even if you don't get it, especially if you don't get it. Because in cognitive psychology, the interesting data isn't the correct answer. You're going to see this time and time again. The biggest leaps in understanding in cognitive psychology has been made when people get things wrong. So the interesting data is what your mind naturally does. So when I ask for hands later, I'm not asking for who got it right. I'm just asking for who had a strategy, who maybe got stuck, who tried one approach and then switched to another approach. And those are the moments when the insights to cognition actually show themselves. So take a swing at this. We got two of them. Importantly, write something down. And if you get stuck, great. That's awesome. That's part of the point. So now that you know, we're going to get into our first challenge of our two challenges. So you're going to try to answer this as best as you can, and then we'll take this up and see what happened with our minds. All right, challenge number one. You can let out a collective groan if this is bringing back horrible images from math class. All right, two trains 100 miles apart both begin to travel directly towards each other. So there's a schematic. Train number one travels at a speed of 60 miles an hour. Train two travels at a speed of 40 miles an hour. As soon as the trains begin to travel towards each other, a bird on train one begins to fly directly towards train two at 80 miles an hour. As soon as the bird reaches train two, it immediately begins to travel back to train one at 80 miles an hour. The bird continues to do this until the two trains collide. And the question is, how many miles has the bird flown? That is, what is the total distance of all the trips that the bird made? So that is your first challenge. I'm going to put 5 minutes on the clock. Let's see what we can do. Yep. The bird starts flying immediately? Immediately. Okay. Yep. And when it reaches the other train, instantaneously turns around and travels towards the other train. Was that the actual sound of someone having an idea? That would be awesome. Just such a profound insight. It was like auditory. All right, real quick show of hands. How many people have a number solution? How many have come up with a final solution? All right, show of hands if you think another minute, 50 seconds is going to get you to the solution. Okay, so I won't torture you anymore, because sometimes doing these cognitive challenges can feel like a little bit of torture. But we're going to see exactly what this challenge here has given us in terms of insight into how our minds work. So this is going to be something that is really important throughout this semester, and that is, how does your mind represent information? How does your mind actually take information that is outside in the real world and symbolize it in your mind so that you can then do cognition, you can then work on it? And this problem here, this challenge here, is either going to be impossible or trivial, depending upon how your mind represents it. So the fact that it wasn't trivial for anybody in here means that we know exactly how you represented this problem, and you probably represented it as a distance problem. So you can represent this train problem as a distance problem in your mind. And if you do so, if you think to yourself, I need to find out how far this bird flew, I need to find the distance that this bird flew, well, then you're going to say to yourself, all right, step one, bird flies at 80 miles an hour. Train 2 travels toward the bird at 40 miles an hour. That's going to be a net speed of 120 miles per hour. They start at a distance of 100 miles apart, so the time they're going to travel is going to be 50 minutes. That's how long before bird reaches train number 2. At that point, the bird turns around. Step 2 begins. During those 50 minutes, train 2 traveled 3.33 miles. The bird traveled 66.67 miles. Step 3, during those 50 minutes, train 1 traveled 50 miles. Train 2 travels 33.33 miles. So the distance apart now is 16.67 miles. And then you start it all again. How far does train 1 go before it intersects the bird? How far did the bird fly before it intersects train number 1? And you do that over and over and over and over again. And then you start introducing calculus for when the distances and the times start approaching 0, when the trains are super close together and the bird is just kind of oscillating between the two because they're so close together. This is going to take you hours and hours and hours, and probably going to require courses in mathematics that are at the graduate level in order to solve. So if you are unable to solve this challenge, what that has told us is that your mind represented this problem as a distance problem. But that's not the only way that you can represent this problem. This problem could also be represented as a time problem. So if your mind represented this as a time problem, how long does this bird fly? Well, then step number 1, the net speed of the trains is 100 miles per hour. The distance of the 2 trains is 100 miles. The trains are going to crash in 1 hour, right? They're going at 100 miles an hour net speed towards each other. They're covering 100 miles. They're going to crash in an hour. Step 2, bird will fly for 1 hour. The bird flies until the trains crash. Bird speed is 80 miles an hour. It flies for 1 hour at 80 miles an hour. It flies 80 miles. If your mind represented this problem as a time problem, it would have been seconds before you solved it. So you can see, and this is going to be a running theme in cognitive psychology, one of the big questions that we ask about how our minds work is, how do our minds represent the information that we're given? Because if our minds represent it one way, our behavior is going to be vastly different than if it represents it another way. So your behavior of solving this problem, if your mind represents it as a distance problem, will take hours. If your mind represents it as a time problem, will take seconds. So the fact that nobody here solved it within the 3 minutes that we tried this problem for suggests to me, and is very strong evidence, that we all represented this as a distance problem rather than a time problem. So these types of demonstrations gives us insight into exactly what is going on. I got to stop pointing to my brain, and you'll see why later. What is going on in our mind? All right, that was cognitive warm up number one. Cognitive warm up number two. This one's going to take a little bit more participation once we take it all up. But this is challenge number two. And thankfully, this one is not about doing a bunch of math on paper, but this is more about how your mind handles uncertainty and how human judgment differs from what's rational. So this is what's going to happen. I'm going to describe a very simple game of chance, but I want you to commit to two answers, even if you're not sure. And I'll show you what those two questions are once we get to what the challenge is. All right, so consider the following game of chance. So this is a game of chance, kind of something that you might find at a casino. You pay a fixed fee to enter the game. So it's a one-time fee. You pay a one-time price to play this game, and then a fair coin is tossed repeatedly until a tail appears, and once it ends up on tails, that's when the game is over. So what's the reward? The pot starts at $1 and is doubled every time a head appears. And then you win whatever is in the pot after the game ends. So whenever that first tail gets flipped and the game is over, whatever's in the pot is what you win. So in other words, you would win $1 if the tail appears on the first toss. So that's the worst you can do. You're guaranteed you're going to win at least $1. However, if a head appears on the first toss and then a tail appears, then you win $2. But you can win $4 if a head appears on the first two tosses and a tail on the third. And you can win $8 if a head appears on the first three tosses and a tail on the fourth. Basically, every single head doubles your money until that tails appears, and then you cash out, then you pay out, and that is the end of the game. So challenge number two, we got two questions that I'm going to ask you. And again, for these two questions, even if you're unsure, I want you to write something down, because this is not a who is good at probability moment, because we're going to ask for like ranges of answers. And the interesting part is the pattern where humans cluster, because that tells us, again, something about cognition. So the two questions to answer is number one, what would be a fair or rational price to pay for entering this game? Now, I'll give you a hint for this one. You are guaranteed to at least win $1, right? Even if you fail on the first toss, you are guaranteed to at least win $1. What that means is that you should be willing to pay up to $1 to play this game. Because if you play this game for 50 cents, every single time you play it, you'll make yourself 50 cents. That's a pretty rational thing to do. So the question is, how much more than $1 is a fair price to pay for this game? I got ahead of myself. How much is a fair price to pay? And then question number two, how much would you actually pay to enter the game? And the important thing for this challenge is to write your two numbers down, because if it's only in your head, it doesn't count, because your brain is going to revise it the moment I start talking after the problem. So for this one, we're only going to put up 100 seconds. So again, two numbers. What's a fair price to pay for entering this game? What would a rational person pay? And then how much would you actually pay to enter? Let's see what. Well, now I'm wondering, why did the 5 minutes work and the 100 seconds doesn't work? Okay, so you got 100 mystery seconds. I'll count it down. We'll begin right now. So again, write down two numbers. They got to be written down. So question one, what's a fair price to pay for this? What would a rational person pay to play this game? And then question number two, how much would you pay to play this game? All right, does everybody have their two numbers? All right, so don't change anything now. Don't change your numbers. Whatever you wrote down, that is your data point. And we're not going to talk about who's right. Question number 2 doesn't even have a right answer, but we want to know what the human mind actually does under uncertainty. So question number 1, the first question, just the rational price. So hands up if you wrote something between $1 and $10. So put your hand up if it's somewhere between 1 and 10. All right, keep your hands up if it's 10 to 100. Anybody 10 to 100? Anybody over 100? Okay, so somewhere between $1 and $10 is basically what the vast majority of us were thought was a rational amount to pay for this game. Now, how much would you actually pay? So let's try that again. We'll start high. Is there anybody willing to pay over 100? Over 10? Over 5? I see some hands up. Over 2? Okay. Anybody not willing to pay $1? All right, cool. So we understood the assignment. So again, you should be more than willing to pay at least $1 for this because you are guaranteed of winning $1. But we saw that most people were saying, you know what, I would actually pay $5 to play this game, or maybe $10, right? We didn't really get anybody going over that time. So what is the actual answer to this? Let's take a look at question number 1. So what is a fair, rational price to pay for entering the game? Rational price would be, what would you pay for this game so that if you played it repeatedly over and over and over and over again, you would make money? If you were able to play this game over and over, how much would you be able to pay and still get money back from paying the game? So for the solution for this actually is a little bit of math. But again, oftentimes in cognitive psychology, what we do is we ask your mind the math question, and then we see what the mathematical solution is. We compare the two, and it lets us know how our mind actually deals with a lot of this uncertainty. Because I don't expect you to do this in your mind, but it does give us insight into what is going on in there. So with a probability of 1 out of 2, you would win $1. With a probability of 1 out of 4, you would win $2. With a probability of 1 out of 8, you would win $4, and etc. So if you're looking for your expected value for this game, your expected payout for playing this game, what you would do is you would say, all right, I'm going to add up 1.5 times 1 because I got a 50% chance of winning $1. I'm going to add up 1/4 times 2 because I have a 1/4 chance of winning $2. I'm going to add up 1/8 times 4 because I got a 1/8 chance of winning $4, and on and on and on and on and on. You might notice that each of those ends up being a half. So the answer to this is that you are going to sum up $1/2. You're going to sum up 50 cents plus 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 50 cents for infinity, and you end up with infinity. You end up with infinity. What that means is that the expected payout for this game is infinite. It's infinite money. So if somebody came up to you and you are a rational person, this is the key here. You are a completely rational person. And by that, I mean cognition rational, cognitive psychology rational, not outside in the world, Webster's dictionary rational. I mean the actual, and we'll talk about what rational means in cognitive psychology. But if you are cognitive psychology rational and somebody came up to you and said, hey, would you pay $10 to play this game? You'd be like, oh my gosh, deal of the century, yes. Yes, here's my $10, let me play. And if that person said, you know what, how about 100 to play this game? You would say, oh my gosh, deal of the century, yes, let me play that game. And if they said, how about $100,000 to play this game? You would say, oh my gosh, deal of the century, let me play that game. There is no amount that they could mention where you would rationally not play this game. So the actual payout for this is infinite. None of us even got close to infinite. So the question is that how much would you actually pay to enter the game was way less than infinity. And cognitive psychologists then asked the question, why? What additional information is your mind taking in to make this particular decision? What additional information are you crunching in your mind to make this particular decision? And interestingly, does anybody want to venture a guess? We'll start off with maybe just a brief, I don't know, but maybe this is what's going on. Does anybody want to venture a guess in terms of what people often think about when they're reasoning this value out? Yep.
Whoever's running the game is probably trying to make a profit, so maybe they're overcharging.
Okay, so you might have applied previous knowledge to how games of chance actually work, right? So you might have thought to yourself, well, the house always wins. The odds are always in favor of the house. So this person's probably going to make money off of this. So it can't be worth that much if they're going to make some money off of this. So you tend to go a little bit lower. So you take that into account, and that is part of where your answer comes up. Yep. Okay, so people's risk tolerance. Let's follow up on that just a little bit. If you could play this over and over and over again, would that make it less risky or more risky? Okay, so if that was I mean, the risk tolerance is there, but what are you risking?
You're risking like how many times you're willing to play to profit.
That's it. One of the major things that your mind takes into account is how much can I play this game before I go broke? Because you are not going to hit that massive payout very likely, right? You're not going to get 14 heads in a row and see that massive payout on your first time, right? You're not probably going to not do it on your 10th time. What you're going to do is it's going to take 1,000 flips, and eventually you'll get there and it'll make it all worthwhile. But then you got to ask yourself, well, it's going to take a number of times of me playing this game. How much do I actually have to lose? Can I spend, how much of my savings do I have? And what they've done is if you give this question and ask people about their socioeconomic status, people that are higher in socioeconomic status will give higher values for how much they would be willing to pay for this game than people in lower socioeconomic statuses. Because people in higher socioeconomic statuses, if they pay $1,000 for the game, they might be able to play it 100 times, 200 times. They might be able to play it 1,000 times if they have $1 million in the bank. I don't have $1 million in my bank. I would go broke. Well, I'm not going to say when I would go broke, but if I was playing it for $1,000 a pop, it would not take very long. So my willingness would be way lower because, again, your mind, maybe you didn't know this, but your mind took into account how much can I lose before I hit it big and factored in that kind of idea of I'm going to have to play this a lot of times before I can actually make my money. So there's a lot of different things that your mind took into account there, made what was actually a very good decision, even though it wasn't a mathematically rational one. And again, we'll see that oftentimes in cognitive psychology, we have that mathematical rational decision just as a guidepost. Not saying that human beings should do that. And in fact, if your friend is ever offered this game and they said, hey, you know what, this person offered me this game, an opportunity to play it. I'm going to sell my house. I'm going to sell my car. I'm going to take out as much debt as I possibly can. I'm going to call in favors for all my friends because they told me it's $300,000 to play the game. And that is a bargain because the expected payout is infinity. You would be a good friend if you said, no, don't do that. That is not a smart thing to do. Completely rational, not very productive, let's say. All right. So we got about 10 minutes left. Let's get to some of the actual things you want to know in order to navigate through this particular course. So we got some of the big stuff out of the way, what we're going to be doing, how we're going to be doing it. Let's take a look at some of the little nitty gritties so that you know exactly what we're going to be encountering. So course objectives, this is your introduction to human cognitive processes. We're going to take a look at attention. We're going to take a look at perception, memory, psycholinguistics, problem solving, and throughout the whole thing, we're going to take a look at thinking. The big idea of cognitive psychology is that you analyze the information that is going into a person's mind. You analyze the information or behavior that is coming out of a person's mind. And based on that, you determine what is going on in a person's mind. And that is it. That is cognitive psychology explained in about 30 seconds. It's information in, measure the information that comes out or the behavior that comes out, and that allows you to deduce what is going on in a person's mind. The course procedure, we've already alluded to this, so I'm going to blow through this a little bit quickly so we can get to the syllabuses. This is going to be like a research lab meeting. All course content is open to ideas and discussion. Just raise your hand. Dr. You Reach Beach. Does this work like this? Or I had this idea, or I just saw this thing on the news. Does this apply to what's going on here? There are no bad questions or bad ideas, but there are wrong ideas. And 95% of your ideas probably are wrong. And I'm very confident in that because that's just how science works. 95% of my ideas are wrong. That's why I do research, to find the 5% that are right. But what I want you to do is I want you to leave those 95% wrong ideas in this room and walk out of here with the 5% that are right. So let's make sure that we can tell the difference between the two as we go through the course. All right, office. I'm in White Camp Hall here, 2157. I am currently in transition. I'm taking Dr. Brian's old office. So, and also I am very rarely ever there. And that is why I have office hours through Zoom. So my office hours, there's a link. Link is also on Canvas. Wednesdays and Fridays, 2:45 to 3:45. Just drop in, no appointment necessary. Phone, don't use it. I don't even know if it's active anymore. If you need to contact me through Canvas messages. And this is for a very specific reason. One of the things that I struggle with most, especially when things get a little bit hectic in my life, is emails. Emails are a massive source of anxiety for me. It's one of the things that I struggle, and it impacts my mental health. Canvas messages, for some reason, does not have that kind of association. So just total transparency, I will answer Canvas messages. There's a response window within 24 hours. If you get it, basically I'll answer Canvas messages every day from 4 to 5. So if you get it in by 4 p.m., I will get it back to you by 5 p.m. If you get it in at like 6:30 p.m., you need to wait until the next day, but it will be within 24 hours. If you send it to my work email, depending upon if I'm struggling or not, it might be a couple of weeks before I check that. So Canvas messages, very prompt. Please use those to get in touch with me. Canvas has all your resources. So your e-text is available through the modules in Canvas. And just to kind of finish this up, I want to make something extremely clear in the syllabus highlights. So first off, for those of you that are busy, maybe this first week, but you don't want to head into the second week completely blind, there is a brief syllabus available. It is just one page. It gives you kind of like the bullet points of the big things that you need to know. You can access that. And then for those of you that want the full experience, they have the full syllabus here with all the information. And I thought it would be really cool to kind of make it look like an old dot matrix printer that printed this, because a lot of cognitive work was done during that time. But I understand that that might not be the easiest thing to read. So there is a text-only Word document there for anybody that might find that more visual syllabus kind of difficult to read. All right, in terms of the syllabus though, a couple of things to be well aware of. The biggest thing that I want you to be aware of, and there's a lot of information here in terms of where your grades come from and when things are due, what's the breakdown. You'll notice, for those of you that have been in my classes before, your best exam is worth the most, your lowest exam is worth the least. That is my built-in forgiveness sliding scale exam. So maybe you don't do so well on an exam, don't worry, it's only going to be worth 4% of your grade. If you ace an exam, congratulations, there's 12% of your grade. But this is the big one here. In terms of performance evaluations, I want you to be very well aware that there are 3 due dates, or 3 types of due dates, during this semester. So we'll start at the bottom. Exam 1, Exam 2, Exam 3, and Exam 4, those are all due on the final day of exams. So you don't have to do them at any point in the semester until the final day of exams. Exam 4 is non-cumulative. It's final exam in name only. So these are just 4 exams, and you can take them whenever you're ready. And if that is the last day, on the last day of exam week, fine. If you're ready next week, fine. They're available. They're good to go. You can take them whenever you're ready. Just because of IUSB policy on the final day of classes, your pre-tests are due, your homework are due, your chapter mastery training and your post-tests are due. Chapter mastery training is a adaptive homework assignment where it basically adapts to the level as you try to master the concepts. The one thing to be very, very aware of for the mastery training is that it uses cognitive principles to maximize your learning, which means that it allows you to complete the mastery training for a period of time, and then it enforces a break. So it does distributed learning where it says, hey, you know what? Here's an hour. Let's do some mastery training. Your hour's finished. You're no longer able to do mastery training. Go take a 4-hour break and come back and do another hour. So it has that built-in distributed practice. The reason I want you to be very, very aware of this is, number one, it's just a good idea to do the mastery training throughout the semester. So chapter 1, chapter 2, the chapters that we cover will have specific mastery training for those. But the other thing is that you cannot binge and cram finish the mastery training. So if it's the last day of classes and you have, 2 chapters of mastery training to complete, you're not going to complete them. It's going to kick you out of the system. It's going to make you wait, and you're going to run out of time. So just be aware for the mastery training. For the pre-test, if it's your style to, let's say that you're sitting in your semester and you're thinking to yourself, you know what, I don't have enough pressure in my life. I know what I'll do. I'm going to save all my pre-tests to the final day of classes. I'm going to do all of them in a 24-hour period. You might be able to. It's completely possible. Don't do that for the mastery training. That's impossible. So it will kick you out. It does require distributed practice. The other one, though, is dates throughout the semester. Those happen throughout the semester. The important one is the CogLabs. So the CogLabs are online experiences that let you participate in actual cognitive psychology experiments that we will then go over in class. So you'll see what the results were. We'll talk about what they mean. We'll talk about what theories they support and how it tells us about what our mind works. Because of that, the CogLabs only work if you finish them before the date that we take them up in class. So that's why those have dates throughout the semester. They're well posted. They're also in the online resources there. So just make sure that you do your CogLabs on time, because once that due date passes, they're graded and they will not be for your grade. The other great thing about CogLabs is there's no wrong answers. It's just, you responding to the stimuli, much like the train problem or the coin flipping problem. No wrong answers. So you don't have to wait to do your CogLabs. And if you're sitting around one Thursday evening and you got nothing to do, you're waiting for your friends to come over or whatever, and you think to yourself, hey, I got half an hour. Let me check out what the next CogLab is due. Oh, it's not due till March? I'll just do it now. I'll have that experience. Totally works. They'll be available for you. All right, and then the two last things. Number one, first of the two last things, I am a big supporter of artificial intelligence. I'm a big supporter of the large language models that are currently being used. I am fine with you using them for this course. I am in such support. You can read my policy there. You don't even have to let me know when you're using it. Okay, so if you find that AI is going to enhance your learning experience, then for sure, use it. Use it to the best of your ability. Use those, explain like I'm 5, I just don't get this. Use those, can you make me a test to make sure that I'm ready for my exam? Use it as in, I will copy and paste this page from my textbook because I don't want to read the whole thing. Can you give me a summary? However you want to use it to enhance your learning experience, feel free. It's good for you to develop those skills. And if it works for you in terms of learning, then I am completely for it. And you don't have to tell me. You don't have to check with me. You don't have to say, hey, you know what? For this exam, I got a summary of the chapter from AI. That's fine. Go ahead and do it. And then the last thing here is that in terms of the class schedule, you'll recall that I mentioned the due dates. CogLabs throughout the semester, all pre-tests due at the end of classes, all homework, mastery training due at the end of classes, exams due on the final day of exams. However, I don't want to just send you out into the semester without some sort of a roadmap. So that's what this class schedule here is. It'll let you know what we're going to be covering in that week. So week 1, we're just doing our introduction. Week 1's a little bit, there's nothing really due. But then you'll see here on week 2, there's a lot of steps here, but these are mostly suggested. So for the CogLabs, these ones are actually due on this week. And that is also in the online Cengage, I believe it is, solution here. But something like complete pretest chapter 1. This is my suggested time to complete pretest number 1. You don't have to have it done by this time. So if you miss pretest number 1, when it's suggested, don't worry about it. You can do it up until the final day. So just use these weekly class schedules as suggestions for when it might be a good idea to do this. So for example, February 8th, if you feel like you're ready to complete exam number 1, that's when I think it makes the most sense. We'll have finished all the topics for exam number 1 by that time. It'll be fresh in your mind. That might be the best time for you to do it. On the other hand, you might take a look at yourself on February 8th and you might say, wow, I still don't understand attention whatsoever. In that case, take the exam later. It's just suggestions, except for the CogLabs and for the 2 video assignments, because the 2 video assignments, one of them is your orientation for MindTap, is how to use the resources. So that's a good one to do super early. All right, I think that is about it. Any questions about stuff that's coming up before we sign off for the day? Yep. Yes. So the exams are take home. They're not going to be in class. They're take home. For the pre-test and the post-test, you have multiple attempts at those. For the pre-test, I'm 100% sure you have multiple tests. However, the exams are one take. So you can do them at home in the comfort of your own home, but they are, one-shot tries. And do them open book. I'm completely fine. They're designed for, to be done open book as well. So feel free to do that. It's a lot of my assessments for my students are designed for the real world. And if you have a job in the real world and somebody asks you to accomplish something in the real world, they're not going to get angry at you if you consult a textbook to make sure you're doing it right. I'm the same way. I am fine. You want to do your exams open book just to make sure, just as that little piece of mind that you have? Absolutely do it. Because again, we're trying to get you to the point where you know the material. How you know the material is a different story. Any other questions? Yep. The research lab is if you want to participate and get research experience by doing projects in my lab. So it's a volunteer experience. But if you are looking to, for example, go to grad school, research experience is a great thing to have on your CV. And it also kind of lets you do a project that you can actually come up with yourself. So my research lab, I kind of run it as a collaboration. So if you come into my lab and you say, hey, Dr. Yudicevich, I'd love to get some research experience, but I have no idea about a research question that I want to look at, I'll say, well, yeah, sure, let's talk about it. Here's 5 projects that I have on the back burner. Let's discuss which one of these looks interesting to you, and we can go forward with that. On the other hand, you might come in and you might just say, hey, I just saw this movie, and they used this metaphor to show that a person was about to die in the next few minutes. Can we do some research on that? And I'll be like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's develop a research project. So you can do it either or, but it is completely voluntary. but it is a great experience to have, especially if you want to make psychology your career. Mhm. You will go to my faculty page, and what you need to know is on my faculty page. Can't say more than that. Yeah, no. The question is great, but it is sort of the instructions will become apparent once the riddle is solved. Yeah. Hmm. Anything else? All right, that is it for today. So thanks for coming by, and hopefully I will see you all next time.